Hey, this is Matt Ertz, the Madison County historian. We are still working to document the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and how it's impacted different businesses, organizations, people, places in Madison County. Today, we are talking to Sara Mitchell, who is the president of KVAC, the Cazenovia Area Volunteer Ambulance Corps. Sara, thanks for being here.
I'm happy to join you.
So for those that aren't familiar, can you kind of explain, I mean, we all know what an ambulance is, but what does KVAC actually do?
KVAC is an advanced life support system. We are a not-for-profit organization with 9 paid paramedics, 1 manager who is a staff member. They are the only paid members of our organization, and we have well over 100 members who are part of us. We are an emergency response system, and we serve the Cazenovia School District is our boundary. We are, however, also a mutual aid to the surrounding districts. We also provide a lending service for things like wheelchairs, crutches, walkers, and other hard medical equipment, which are donated to us by the community. We sanitize them and then turn around and lend them to anyone who needs them for however long they need them. And our community is very generous in that way. We also sponsor a student corps, which last year had 40 members. They are select high school students who are CPR, AED trained, and who help the paramedics and ride on the ambulances. So that's pretty much who we are and what we do. We have about 800 calls a year. Some of them are transports to hospitals. Some of them are simply people who have fallen and need a lift assist to get back up again. So that's who we are. That's what we do.
Okay. So talk about, when did COVID start to appear on your guys' radar, and then how did you guys respond?
We became aware of COVID-19 in probably February. It became a concern very, very quickly. We found out about it through the Madison County Health Department, through the New York State Health Department, and of course through news reports. And it sent us immediately into planning mode. The board and I met to discuss at our regular March meeting what were we going to do. So effective March 10th, we pulled all of our student corps kids off the ambulances and out of the building. We suspended all of their ongoing activities. Effective March 26th, we suspended, part of our organization includes 40 very valuable dispatchers who are in our building and who are responsible to get a second ambulance out. Our first ambulance is staffed 24/7. The second ambulance, we rely on our dispatchers to get a second crew and have that ambulance ready if it has to go. We suspended the dispatchers in the building on March 26th, and they all began to work remotely with pagers. They were not allowed in the building anymore. Also effective March 26th, our manager began working remotely, and that involves some of the scheduling, well, most of our scheduling, and it involves all of our billing practices. So she began working from home. About April 1st, we also suspended our volunteer EMTs. Those are emergency medical technicians, and they are extremely helpful in providing a third man in the crew with our paramedics. And we suspended their activities about April 1st. So then we were down to simply our paramedic in the building and our on-duty driver in the building. We closed the building to everybody else, including the public. We suspended our lending equipment program. We didn't take equipment in, And we lent it out as long as we had it to lend. Once we were out of wheelchairs, we had no more to lend because we wouldn't take them in. Anybody entering the building, excuse me, anybody entering the building has, and this is for New York State protocols, had to have their temperature taken and sign in and certify that they had no symptoms of COVID-19. That included temperature taking and so on. And they had to verify that. On May 3rd, the board met in a special meeting and we decided that we were not going to have our one and only fundraiser for the year. We have a craft fair, which has over 100 vendors and so on, and we suspended that this year. So we are having no fundraiser this year.
And how much money does that typically bring in?
It typically brings in about $17,000 a year.
Oh, wow, so it's a significant loss.
It's a significant loss, and it's a significant loss to the community. Our organization has been in business for 46 years, and this would have been our 45th craft fair.
Okay.
And again, it is and has been for a number of years our only fundraiser. So it's a huge undertaking. The community looks forward to it because it's always on the weekend of July 4th. And so, go ahead.
With the loss of the students and all these folks, how do you continue to man the buses?
Well, that's the paramedics. Like I say, we have 9 wonderful paramedics,
Right.
and they are scheduled 24/7. Our drivers are also scheduled 24/7, 1 per shift. So
Okay.
there was always an on-duty crew ready to service the community. The backup crews were able to respond. That's where our EMTs come in primarily. And they were able to provide the second ambulance was it needed. Now, initially, say beginning in March, once the governor went to New York pause, everybody stayed home and we didn't have a huge amount of need to respond during those initial weeks.
That was my next question. Did you see a drop in calls?
We did initially. You know, the calls that we had would have been if somebody fell or an automobile accident or another non-COVID kind of response. Now, the other thing is that our crews were told initially to respond to every call, assuming it could potentially be a COVID call. So they were told to prepare and to wear equipment as though they were responding to a COVID call.
Okay.
Which caused some problems for us because we talk about PPEs, personal protective equipment, and our ambulances and our supplies were not prepared in the sense of a pandemic. In other words, we had N95 masks, but they were seldom used. And one of the first experiences we had when we needed to respond, Madison County would tell us if they had a suspicious call that might be COVID-19, they would use the code word, take universal precautions. In other words, be prepared as though this is a COVID patient. And one of the first experiences we had very early on was with the N95 masks that we had in our supply. The elastic is not very good in the N95 masks that were provided. And we went through 3 masks for 1 EMT before he found one that the elastic didn't break. So the first weekend, we had about, I don't know, 30 maybe masks in supply. And our manager and I went through, we both happened to be sewers and have sewing machines. and we got a hold of some extra elastic and reinforced the supplies that we had, because there was a scramble initially to be sure that you had enough supplies, because we don't go out wearing masks. Ordinarily, you wouldn't do that. So
Did you
that
see,
meant,
did you see a drastic increase in price when you had to order stuff?
what we found initially was there was no stuff to get.
Okay.
Madison County had the same problem. We, in the first 2 weeks were a real scramble. Like I say, we went about reinforcing what we had. And the crews, once they took an N95 mask, they kept it. Instead of going through one after another, they would keep it. Because again, each individual person on one of the ambulances isn't going out 10 times a day. So they could keep the mask and wear it again if they needed it down the road. We are very, very fortunate. We have a wonderfully supportive community. And once, word of mouth kind of spreads, and we had people bringing us, well, for example, somebody who had done some home repairs. We had a few people who had done some home repairs and gone to Home Depot or Lowe's, and while they were doing their home repairs, they would wear a mask. And they would go and say, oh, you know what, I had to buy, it was a package of 5. I've got 4 left. Would you guys like them? And of course, the answer was yes. At that point, we would take anything because we didn't know how much we were going to need. We had a community member who had access, and I still don't know who her supplier was. She showed up with a box one day of 1,000 surgical masks, not the N95s, but the surgical masks, and donated those to us. It was enough that we were able then to donate some to the local fire departments and rescue squads, because they're a huge help to us. When we go out on a call, Madison County notifies the fire or rescue people in our district, and they respond as well. So we were able to give masks to some of those people. We had somebody else who donated the KVAC, I call them jumpsuits, but the ones that the full suits. And donated a whole bunch of those in all different sizes, so that our little people are not going out in size XXX Tyvek suits if they need them.
Right.
And that was great. We put another precaution we took. We have, our ambulances are both quite new, and they had been designed with a small door that would close the driver compartment from the back compartment, excuse me, of the ambulance, so that our driver compartment was totally isolated from the paramedic in the back. They could still communicate, but there was no little window opening between the two. So we did that. We also, if it's a situation where we have, particularly with the elderly, if we're transporting a person and the husband or wife wants to, can we go, to stay with the person? We no longer do that. We don't, if it's a child, of course, the parents in the back compartment with the child. But we no longer.
But just one parent in that scenario?
Yes. Yep. Largely because, I'm not saying they would never take both parents, but largely because the area in which they have to work is limited.
Yeah.
And you've got a paramedic, you've got the child on the stretcher, you've got another parent back there, and potentially you could have an EMT back there. Now, initially, of course, that wasn't the case, but we've reopened to the point where our paramedics are now, or our EMTs are now back on duty again. One of the things our crews have missed, again, we have a very generous community, and they bring us brownies and homemade cookies and treats and stuff like that. And of course, we've had to say, no, we don't do any of that anymore, which now that we're opening back up again a little bit, they're missing. They point that out, that they don't have any treats upstairs. There's no muffins, there's no cookies, there's no donuts. And so that's been one of the more, I won't call it entertaining, but it's our crew. They love food. Okay.
Have you guys found, you guys aren't, I don't want to. So on another, I was an EMT when I was much younger, and and one of the things that helped me a lot when I was younger was the conversations afterwards, kind of the decompression stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We know that there are people in the medical field that are struggling, especially when bigger places have gotten kind of crushed, for lack of a better way to put it. Have you guys had any issues with that, or because it really hasn't impacted your side, have you guys been okay with it?
We have been very fortunate in this area that we have not encountered patients with COVID a lot. Mm-hmm. And the Madison County and the state, if they test somebody, if they test one of our transport patients and they test positive, they have to notify us back, so that potentially our paramedics have to self-quarantine. That happened twice. Our paramedics are all part-time, so they all ride with multiple agencies. Fortunately, the two that were in question weren't as a result of anyone we transported, so that was a good thing. The one guy had to self-quarantine and be tested until the test results came back from the patient, and they proved to be negative. So it did not impact our scheduling and our ability for him to ride an ambulance. The other gentleman did have to self-quarantine for, I think it was a week, and that impacted our scheduling. But again, this is an emergency, and people, and I want to think in all communities, but especially in our community, they all step up. This is an emergency. So somebody is not going to be able to fill his shifts. One of the other guys stepped up and took the shifts. Okay. As far as decompressing, you're right. I have trained our dispatchers for many, many years. I've been one of the trainers. And I tell them, because we are super HIPAA conscious, right? If you are a part of us,
I remember.
What you see here stays here. But these guys, when they come back, if it's a difficult call, they either will tell you as a way of decompressing, as a way of getting it off their shoulders. They will tell you about it, or they won't. And if they don't pressure them. Don't ask questions. When they come back, if they are going to tell you something, they tell you. If they come back and they're not going to say anything, don't press them to talk about it. They talk about it, meaning the paramedics and the EMTs and even the drivers. They have conversations about it that you can overhear in the building. So they talk about things themselves. I haven't seen an impact from COVID-19 that's increased that. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep. Well, and like I said, it's one of those things that, and it's impacted the general population too. More and more we're hearing about folks having mental issues, just right. Kind of from the idea of isolation and quarantining and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And we had a call at base one day. I happened to be there. Again, we locked down to only 2 people in the building unless you were there on KVAC business. I'm there a lot on KVAC business. And I happened to be there one day, and the other thing we had to do was route some of our business lines, our phone lines, because the crews, if they go out on a call, there's nobody there to answer a phone.
Right.
And I happened to be there one day, excuse me, when they went out on a call. And it was a lady that they were actually concerned could be a COVID patient. And so they had gone fully suited up, and it was an apartment. And after they were gone, again, I'm working on some business, and the business of phone rang, and I answered it, and it was the lady's neighbor. And she is quite frantic, to be perfectly honest, because she's watched the ambulance pull up. She's watched people fully suited up go into this lady's apartment and take her out and take her in the ambulance. And she was worried about, she be allowed outdoors? Who should they call to come and disinfect the doorways, the whatever? Was it safe for her to leave her apartment to go walk her dog? And that was one call that we had, where fortunately, like I say, things happen for a reason. I happened to be there. I could answer the phone and say to her, you're okay. You're safe. We don't know that she's COVID positive. When we find out, if we find out she's COVID positive, you will be notified because you're her neighbor.
Right.
But
the contract
tracing. For right now, yes, you're safe to go out and walk your dog. And this was before the masking requirements.
Right.
If it were after the masking requirements, I would have said, put your mask on and go out and walk your dog. But this was before that. So there's concern out there in the community. I've done a couple of letters to the editor of our local paper, telling them what our organization situation is. And one of them was to say to them, don't come to the building, call 911, because we do get walk-ins. Right. We get people who come and say, well, my husband's not feeling well, or my wife's not feeling well. And, she seems to be having a little trouble catching her breath. And instead of calling for an ambulance to respond to them, they get in the car and think it's better to come to us, which it never is. Right. You always want to call 911 and stay put. Stay where you are. Let us come to you. But we do have people who do that. They come to us. They know they can. And so that's, like I say, I have written letters to the editor encouraging don't do that. Once things started opening up again, I have written another letter to the editor telling them where we stand. This is where we are. This is what we can do, meaning lending equipment. And that was kind of funny. I sent this letter, and it was in the paper. And the following week, I was very specific about where to drop it off. Please don't come to the door. We won't answer the entry door. Please drop it off by what we call our third bay, which is our third big door. We don't have 3 ambulances. We only have 2, but the building is built to accommodate that if we ever need it. So the letter said, drop them off at the third bay. The next week, on any given day, you could go, and outside our third bay, there were wheelchairs and walkers and commodes and crutches and all sorts of things. So the community was reading and responding. They seemed to be very sensitive to knowing those kinds of things.
Well, that's important.
So that, yeah, it's helped. And like I say, word of mouth, somebody reads the letter and then they talk to their neighbor about it. It helps.
How will COVID impact you moving forward? Like the analogy I've used with most people is, I'm guessing, I think on our phone conversation, you had grandchildren that were coming over yesterday.
Right.
They will forever know how to wash their hands because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, they will.
What long-term impact, even it could be positive, it could be negative, do you think this will have on KVAC?
Well, we're still in the transition stage, and we are, of course, driven in part by protocols from the county and the state. Our student corps, for example, right now is still on hiatus. We are working on a plan to be able to have a student corps. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like right now. But the plan is going forward to bring them back this fall.
Okay.
We are still doing the state sign-in, the temperature taking, anybody who comes in the building. And again, we try very hard to limit that only to the crew and the dispatcher. We try not to have additional people in the building at all. We're still split dispatch. Some of our dispatchers are not comfortable coming back in the building. They are still dispatching from home. And we expect that to continue. If people aren't comfortable being there, we're going to try and provide the staff with another way to be involved, but not be in the building. We're working on probably, I'm supposing at this, I have a board meeting next week where this will be coming up, improving disinfecting systems for the ambulances. There are a number of things in other departments. The departments all work together, but improving our disinfecting system for the ambulances is always going to be an ongoing thing going forward.
Right.
It's always been important, but now we're hypersensitive to it. We are working right now. We're worried about the fall. We don't know what's going to happen with schools, with colleges. We have a college here in our community. And every year, without COVID, we have a number of calls at the college, for anything. We're concerned about that. So we are working to be sure that we have increased the PPEs that we have available in our supplies. We're going to be providing for our staff more PPE than we ever have before. We're not sure what that's going to look like, but right now, I'm hesitant to use the word stockpile because that gives everybody the impression of running out and buying toilet paper. And that's not what we're doing. We're not stockpiling thousands and thousands of masks
No, but if you had 30
equipment
before, you're doing more than that now.
Exactly. And to the point that I mentioned earlier with discovering that our N95 masks, that the elastic isn't good in them. A lot of our PPEs have always had expiration dates on them, which who pays attention to an expiration date on an N95 mask sitting in a cupboard? You don't. But we learned as a result of this that the reason they have an expiration date is that the elastic on them is not good elastic and it loses its elasticity. So we've learned from that. We'll be keeping better track of things like, is this equipment good and ready to go? And like you say, if we had 30 before, we will have 60 now. That's what we're doing. Making sure that things like our thermometers, who goes on a call for a potentially broken leg and takes the person's temperature? You don't do that. Well,
Right.
Now you do that. So that kind of equipment that's always been carried on an ambulance, but perhaps has been sitting in the drawer in the ambulance and not regularly used, hasn't necessarily been regularly tested. They would look and see, is the thermometer here? When they do the check, they check these ambulances every time the crew changes. The new crew goes down and checks to be sure that everything's on the ambulance that needs to be there. Even if the ambulance hasn't been out for 2 days, they still do that.
So will there be additional training now? Because one of the things, when you said that, there are stressors that can give your body false, I don't know what the right word is, but you break your leg, your body starts to stress out, it reacts. Could that kind of create something else? So let's say you have a situation where the person appears to have a fever, but it's more because of the situation, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Versus, so
Exactly.
does that change how you respond? Is there going to have to be more training, that kind of stuff?
I'm not sure there's going to have to be more training. Actually, it's funny you mentioned that. We did just have a situation maybe a week or 10 days ago with somebody we responded to, and it came in as a person with an underlying medical condition. And the medical condition is the reason they were responding. That was the primary reason for the response. And the 911 dispatcher said, and in addition to this, and running a fever. Well, they got there, and again, because the person had an underlying medical condition, they were stressing over the underlying medical condition that the ambulance was responding to. And they found that the temperature increase was because of the underlying condition. It was not because of any other symptom.
Right.
So they're going to find that,
Yeah.
and they're going to be aware of it. I'm not sure it will increase the need for training. They'll just be more sensitive to it.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the folks at Cazenovia or the area that you serve, which is Nelson, Fenner, all those places?
All those places, just that they have been a wonderful support for what we do. They have supported us. They sent equipment when they knew that equipment was needed. When the media started saying that places were having trouble, like hospitals and so on, having trouble getting enough protective equipment, our community came to us and said, what can we do for you to help support that? That's been wonderful. They have been fabulous in losing our fundraiser. We always have a 4th of July running race around the lake that is a fundraiser for our athletic running teams. This year, they took the proceeds from that and split it between the running teams, our fire department, which also lost its only fundraiser for the year, and KVAC. And so they gave back to those organizations. We've had other people who have done fundraisers, and the money has come to us because they know we have lost our fundraiser. So the community here is just wonderfully supportive in all ways, and we simply can't thank them enough for everything that they do. We've had notes that are taped to our front door that I put inside on our countertop for the staff to see, of thank you for being there. You know, thank you for what you do. One child, I think it was, made flowers from tape of some kind and had it in a little vase with a thank you note just for doing what we do. And so those kinds of things are, I think, supportive sometimes more than the community knows, to make people who go on very difficult calls sometimes, even if the notes are not related to any specific call, to know that the community appreciates what all these volunteers do is very, very important to us. And we want to thank them for that.
I thank you for taking the time today to talk to me, but more so thank you and all your volunteers and staff for doing what you do. It's a critical need across everywhere. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully we don't have to talk to you again because this thing gets solved, but maybe after winter, we'll give you a buzz again just to see, because I think most people think there's going to be some form of uptick when it gets cold again, and Lord knows that's coming.
Right. And we're hoping that because we've done so well, and we look nationally, and we've done so well, and the governor has made some very, very difficult decisions. But if we have to go back to lockdown to keep people safe, that's what we'll do. I explained to my staff that I look at us, we happen to sit on a hill, and I've said to them, think of us as the castle on the hill, and we've pulled up the drawbridge. The moat is closed. We've pulled up the drawbridge. We're in here as safe and sound as we can make all of our staff. And if we have to do that again, we will. The drawbridge is down. We are reopened to the community and to our staff. But if we have to pull that drawbridge up again, we will, to keep everybody safe. So we'll hope for the best, and I'll see you in the spring, perhaps.
All right. Stay safe, Sarah. We will talk to you soon.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye now.